Hi, my friends. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Allie Wilkins. If it's your first time here, I'm an oracle, I'm a seer. I work with the way of the ancient feminine, and I just really teach the lineages that I'm experiencing myself, that I'm remembering, that I'm studying. And I'm really just obsessed with everything around the mystery and the initiatory process. So that's what I do in my work and here on this channel. If you're coming back to the channel, welcome back. We have a special treat today. I have a special guest with me. Her name is Elizabeth Bercovici, and we're talking about the Arthurian mystery, the Arthurian myths and legends. And this is something that over the last 2 years, really, I've developed a much stronger interest in as I've been deepening into my own ancestry, which I haven't really known much about for my whole life. And I've been kind of on this quest to find more. And as soon as I entered that, I came across these teachings and these mysteries of the Arthurian legend. And in my quest for that, I found Elizabeth, and I wanted to share her with you guys today. I asked her if she would want to share some of her wisdom with us, because she really knows so much about not just the Celtic lineage, but also specifically Arthurian magic. And so I wanted to share her with you today. So I hope that you enjoy this interview. She really showcases a lot, like so much information about some of the main characters of the Arthurian legend, and you can work with her further in this. And she has some free gifts for you, and also just a really awesome coupon for one of her courses that I've taken that I would recommend at the end of the class. I also am doing an Arthurian transmission in January 7th to be exact. So you can also look more into that. But I hope that you enjoy this. If you do, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, let us know what your takeaways are, what you found interesting. Subscribe to both of our channels. And without further ado, I hope you enjoy the session. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I have a very special guest here with me, Elizabeth Bercovici. So Elizabeth, do you want to just share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into the magic of the Arthurian mystery.
Oh, sure. Oh my God, Allie, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here. I am a mythic storyteller, a writer, but really like the reason that I'm so happy to be here with you today is there is such a calling, I think, in these times to awaken to the magic and mystery of Avalon and King Arthur. And even though like I tell stories, I love stories from all over the world, there's something about the Arthurian legends that speak to people who have magic in their heart, the people who are wanting to remember that magic is all around us. These stories bring us back to that essential truth. So that's just like, I think the way I want to introduce myself today as someone who is very much like I don't know how to say, like, I feel like there's like a sacred energy that these stories bring forth. They are more than just legends. They are more than just tales. And I'm very happy to dive deeply today with you into the mysteries.
One of the things that I love about you and your work so much, I see you as such a beautiful storyteller, but also such a wonderful example of the bard in today's world, which really isn't like, I mean, I don't hear a lot of people talking about the bard. Do you want to just first explain what a bard is to anyone who might not be aware of that term?
Okay, sure, absolutely. So the bards, like they were oral storytellers, specifically in the Celtic tradition. And most of the bards, like the ones that we hear about, really are from ancient Wales. And this is funny because this does connect into the legends of Merlin. So many people just think of Merlin as a wizard, but he also was a chief bard. So the bards traditionally, like they would actually study for 12 years to become a master storyteller. The bards would go all over the ancient world, telling their stories, bringing them from village to village. They would also bring their stories, bring their songs to kings and queens. And if you were a very skillful and renowned bard, so usually the king wouldn't want to, they would not want to let you go. So it was a very different time and space. This was like long, of course, like before Netflix, before theater, this really was like the storytellers. They would come and they would weave enchantments of the word, and they would put you I feel like it really was under a spell, but it was a spell of such beauty. And so that really is like when I talk about like the bard, we know them as ancient storytellers, but like there's so many people on this planet. Everyone is a storyteller, but the bards really were ones who like this art was something that was so sacred. And the way that they opened to receive the stories was to open up to spirit. I think a lot of people on this channel, like I know that you are connected to like the energy of the priestess. So really it's a very similar thing. There is an opening to spirit and letting spirit flow through you. There is an invocation that happens. And usually the same way that you might invoke a goddess like Isis, the bards would invoke usually Ceridwen. Some of you may know her as like a Welsh goddess of inspiration. Others may know her as a witch or an enchantress, but she really is the mother of bards. Other times, usually the bards would invoke Taliesin. And he, like, there are many, many stories of Taliesin. I don't know if this is the right space to get into them, but he really is the master bard. And if you ever have to tell a story, this could be on stage, this could be to your cousin or your brother or your sister, literally call in Taliesin right before you start to tell the story and see what magic comes forth. So really the bards, like it really was an oracular storytelling tradition, very much a channeled practice. And so while there was a great knowledge of tales and legends, it really was about the bard's deep connection to spirits. And this is why it's not talked about as much in today's world, because there's a certain level of spiritual attunement and initiation required to tell stories in this way. And one thing I can say, it's interesting. I feel that like, I know that many of you, all of you have told stories, and I'm sure you've told the same story to different people. Maybe one you told to like a boyfriend and one you told to your best friend. And you'll notice that the stories always seem to come out a little bit different. And that's because the story itself has a life of its own. Every rendering, every telling has a life of its own. So the bard is innately attuned to the life of stories themselves, to the life of words. And this is also very, interestingly enough, like we were talking about Merlin before, I mentioned that Merlin was a bard, not just a wizard. Really, it also kind of comes back to the power of the word spells. And so it's this idea that the words are alive. The words are alive and there is magic contained therein. So this is an ancient bardic knowing, an ancient bardic wisdom and understanding.
So you can see, you guys watching, how she embodies this just in how she tells the story around this itself. So much power and presence. And it's, to me, it feels like the energy of when, you know, someone is telling a story and it just pulls you completely in, and you can see yourself in the space. You can feel yourself in the story itself, just like captivated with what's happening. So you absolutely have that skill set. Expanding from the bards, this is important during the time period of Arthur, because oral tradition was how stories were told. A lot of things weren't written down.
Absolutely. Especially like the Celtic people, they believed that if there was something important, it needed to be remembered. So like, it's interesting. So a lot of the stuff that we actually have, like the knowledge we have of the bards and a lot of the knowledge we have from this Arthurian period, as luck would have it, really is because of the Romans, especially like the time of King Arthur, because the Romans were like, we need to record this. This must be recorded. This. So it's interesting. So there's a lot of wisdom that like the bards were very connected to the druids. And so they were kind of forced to write down some of the sacred practices, some of the wisdom. But my deep soul understanding and knowledge is that the most sacred and secret practices would never have been written down to appease the Romans. So a lot of this is really only, it's known through sacred remembrance, sacred soul remembrance, and gnosis. And one thing I can say is that it's interesting, when I first really had like an awakening as a bard, I was actually getting my master's degree in creative writing, and I was going to leave the program because like the way that the program was structured, it was like a Shark Tank. Everyone was tearing each other apart. Some of you may, some of you may have heard me tell this story before, but I literally just like couldn't take it. And I remember there was a friend of mine in the class, like one of the classes I was in, one of the creative writing workshops. And I said, I don't think it's supposed to be like this, with everyone like tearing everyone down. And my friend turned to me and said, well, if you can't take the heat, just leave. And I was like, and so I tell the story. Some of you may have heard the story before, but I really felt like for me, in my soul and my heart, I'd known since I was 8 years old, I was supposed to be a writer. And this was the moment that I was like, I don't know if this is the path for me. I don't know if I can do this. And so as befits a mythic tale, I decided to climb a mountain. And I decided that by the end of my hike, when I get down this mountain, I will know if I'm meant to be a writer, if I'm meant to stay in this program. What am I supposed to do? Like God, like the universe, show me the way. And when I got to the top of the mountain, like the very top of the mountain, I just surrendered. Complete surrender. It's like, I don't know what to do. And out of nowhere, this was the first time I heard a voice like break through the ether, break through the silence. And it just simply said, there is another way. And this was the first time I'd ever heard like a voice come through. But I wasn't afraid. I knew that this was a holy force, a holy sacred energy. And I was stilled in that moment. And I basically kind of had this knowing I just had to go back down the mountain. And when I got back down, there would be further instruction revealed to me. One of the first things that I remember, I was told, don't leave the program. Finish the program. Like, it's okay. Like, just take what resonates and leave the rest. But one of the first things I was like told to do by these guides was to write by candlelight. And I share this because I was like, what? And like, there was this kind of idea of it being a blank slate, of throwing out everything that the modern teachers the modern writing teachers were saying about the way creativity operated. And for me, I was really told, go back to the beginning, where it's just you and the flame, you and the darkness. And I did not know, this is the point. I know this is also very bardic. We kind of speak in circles. I did not know until much later that was an ancient bardic practice, was to go into the darkness and let the mystery reveal itself to you. That's how a lot of times they would remember like sacred stories, stuff that was not even written down, stuff that had not even been transmitted from one bard to the next, but was only held in the collective soul wisdom of humanity. And so I share this because all of us, whether you are a writer, a storyteller, you all have sacred soul wisdom within you that only you know, and you have the skills, the keys to access this deep inside you. And I'll stop rambling, but one of the ways really is to go into the darkness. Like if you want to have a flame, that's also beautiful, and just literally become one with the fire, become one with the flame, come into stillness and presence with all that is. And the mysteries will reveal themselves to you.
Takes us back to such a different time period.
Yes.
This is why I personally love and am so fascinated with the Arthurian tales, because it does feel like such a different time period where things were done so differently, but also at the same time, such a pivotal time period where there's a lot of crisis happening and there's a lot of major world events happening. And I kind of see this time period as when Magick was, and we'll get into the magicians and the people we want to talk about in this space in a second. I see this as a time period where Magick it was like a splitting of consciousness, where the dimensions were going behind the veil. And now it's been behind the veil and we can all access it. Absolutely. And we're starting to access it so much more deeply. But right now we're also in a profound time of great change as well. So with that, let's start talking about some of these four figures that we both felt really, really wanted to be here and to be brought forward to everyone sharing today. So let's start with Merlin. And Merlin is actually what attracted me to Elizabeth in the first place. So last year I found Elizabeth, I think through one of her YouTube videos. So I'll tag her YouTube here. So guys, make sure that you follow her. She has so many great summits, and I love all the information that you share. So I found you through Merlin, and of course. And one of the questions that I had asked Elizabeth that I'd love for you to expand on here just bringing Merlin's energy into this space here. How is it that you have connected to Merlin, and how do you work with him as a guide? Like, is there anything that you want to share that feels pertinent to the space around that?
Well, I can say that Merlin is very selective. That's all. It's like, so a lot of people, when they first connect with the Merlin mysteries, I don't always recommend starting with Merlin, because it could almost feel like there's like a wall and you're like, Merlin, talk to me. And like, it's like, no. So Merlin, like, I must say that on the inner planes, he really is, he is a loving guide. He's a loving teacher. But really, like, I feel like to start working with Merlin, you need to embody the heart of Camelot within. And so I really feel like it's almost better to start working with like Guinevere, Arthur, working with the mysteries of the Round Table. And really, like, that paves the way for Merlin to come through. And one of, like, the things that has not been present, but I feel it wanting to come through, is this energy of the Holy Grail. And so a lot of this, like when you work with Merlin on the inner planes, when he is ready for you, it really is when you are opening up to the divinity of the Grail itself, when you are ready to come forth, really as this crystalline channel, this divine embodiment of like really being a living, breathing, like I would say, conduit of heaven on earth. You become the Grail. And I say this, I believe the Holy Grail is an actual like object. Like, it's not just something that I believe exists on the inner planes. But I do feel that when you connect with Merlin, I see that what he's doing is he's helping to bring you into that crystalline Grail consciousness. So there is a purification that happens when you connect with the Holy Grail. And a lot of times the legends that we hear, the Arthurian legends, really they are almost manuals. They are manuals for really how to purify our hearts, our consciousness, to purify on a soul level, to really achieve this Grail consciousness. There are all different stories, some that connect the Holy Grail to the fairy kingdom, and it's like known as the Fairy Grail. I can share a little bit about that in a minute, but what's really coming through is there are other stories which connect this Grail being that which caught the blood of Christ at the crucifixion. And that's what's really coming through right now, because whether you subscribe that it was like the same Grail, like, I don't know if I believe that like physically it was the same vessel, but it doesn't actually matter, because energetically, whether you are Christian or not, I really see Christ as a divine avatar. I believe there are many different avatars, even now incarnate on the planet. And I believe that that divinity is part of what holds the sacred matrix, like this like celestial matrix of the Holy Grail together. So when you connect with Merlin on the inner planes, really he is the gatekeeper holding this Grail consciousness. And this is also very connected to the Garden of Eden. I don't want to get too esoteric. I can explain more of this connection because I think it's really important. So let me just, okay, I'm going to try to like explain this clearly for people who are new to this subject matter. So in the earliest Grail stories, there is a story of the Fisher King. And so this is a wounded king, and there are different knights, King Arthur's knights, who go and they find the Fisher King in his castle. And all around the Fisher King, all around this castle is a wasteland. And you go into the castle, you meet the Fisher King, and there's a lance. There is some kind of wound in the king's leg. And often this is seen to be identical in many ways to the lance that wounded Christ. So it's very interesting. There are parallels in the legends, but really the focus here is that there are knights that go to the Fisher King, and in this castle, there are maidens that come in a procession, one of which holds the Holy Grail. And there are ways to get the Grail, but it's often the case that the knights come and they don't know how to purify. They don't know the right thing to ask the Fisher King in order to be blessed with the Grail. And I share this because the whole point is that once a noble-hearted knight can get the Grail. It is the key to the restoration of that wasteland outside, for there to be a restoration of paradise. So really the Grail is the key to this realization of Eden, to this realization of paradise once more. And so I share this because depending on where you are in the world, like for me, I live right outside of New York City. So even though I know that for many people, they might see this place where I live as a metropolis that is buzzing with life. But when I walk outside, because I've got this like Celtic heart, it's like I go outside and I just see concrete. I'm like, there's concrete and there's just billboards. And I'm like, what is this? And that's like how I see it. So for me, I didn't realize till I started studying the Arthurian legends that I really, even as a child, saw this place as a wasteland, which of course, like this is still God's land, but like compared to like the original way that this used to be with hills and valleys and trees, it is not that anymore. And so really part of what happens when we engage with the Arthurian mysteries is that we are remembering paradise. We are remembering Eden first in our hearts. And then we are really invited to bring that paradise, to bring that sacred remembrance back to the world. And this really is the legacy of Arthur. I know I'm weaving them all together. This vision of Camelot really is this vision of equality. It is this vision of heaven on earth. And that's one of the things that when we first connect to these Arthurian mysteries, it's very helpful to connect with Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, because that really seeds that heart of the Grail within you. And the more that you purify, the more that you really feed that holy heart within, that is when you can start to connect with Merlin on the inner planes, and the wisdom that he shares. This deep ancient magic is revealed to you. And another thing that's coming through that I just want to share quickly is like there is a history of misuse of magic. And that is why it is very hard to access Merlin. That is one of the reasons why it's challenging to access him, because Merlin's magic, Merlin's wisdom, this is very Arthurian, is really only for those who are worthy. And it's for those who are worthy, and this is not a judgment. This literally is just like, how pure a heart are you coming to the divine with? And when your heart really has that deep, I feel like all of us have to go through like a soul purification. That's part of being here in form. It's like, I think that's part of us living our Dharma. That's part of us living these human lives. That is when Merlin truly decides that we are ready to take on his wisdom. And so hopefully that answers that question. I know that there's more I could go into, but that's what wanted to come through.
Yeah, so beautiful. And I love that the word worthiness came in, because we talked about this before as well, but a lot of you guys who watch my channel, as we've talked about dragons, I speak about that word worthiness, and it has the same exact thing. And I just smiled when you said the purity of the heart, because that's the same phrase that always comes through. That's not, so the worthiness that is sort of the requirement to gain access to certain forms of information, or certain like attunements to power, or maybe even to magic and mystery with Merlin. It requires us to be ready to be able to hold that in a certain capacity. It's not the way that our current society might use the term worthiness of, I'm deserving of this, or I'm worthy of that. It's like a completely separate context, which I think is really kind of key to all of these mysteries. And yeah, so coming back into Merlin's frequency, Merlin to me always feels very like mysterious, like he'll speak in riddles, like I feel him very strongly in my presence, but it's always kind of like he's standing over here like 10 feet away with like a staff in his hand, just like watching. And I'm like, but what do you think? He's like, what do you think about it? Like, and the thing that's interesting about working with Merlin that feels so different to me than, because I work with so many other guides, it feels like his energy is not just like giving his power to you. It's like you are having to learn how to be a steward of that power, which is also similar to me with the dragons. Although the dragons do tell me a lot more things, just like very, very clearly, where as Merlin is a little bit more mysterious in his delivery. And I remember you said that you, in your personal relationship with Merlin, you're asking him things all the time. So do you think that how has that contributed to your relationship with him, or did that develop over time, like where you were talking to him a lot more?
Well, I work with a special tradition like through the vortex healing lineage. So that is like it's an energy healing transmission. It's a special lineage connected to like so one thing that you should know that like many people when they connect with Merlin, they think that there's one Merlin. And like that's the Merlin from like all the movies and all the books about King Arthur. But actually, Merlin was originally a title. And so this came because in ancient Wales and like the ancient Celtic cultures, there was a word for magical transformation, and that word was Merlin. So, like, when these wizards would show up and they would do things, the people would be like, oh, that's a Merlin, that's a magical transformation. And so that actually became a title. So, the Merlin that we attribute, like the King Arthur's Merlin, really is the sixth Merlin of this lineage. And I think that he is like a very powerful being on his own to connect with. There are stories of literally 12-year-old Merlin, like going, like talking to King Vortigern and like giving prophecy. So it's very like to me, that specific soul, the sixth Merlin, he is the one that we mostly know from legend. He really is this powerhouse of a soul. So when you're connecting on the inner planes, you may want to intend the Merlin who assisted King Arthur. But I want to say that so when I connect, when did I find this lineage? Probably 2019. I found this lineage and it was so funny because I remember like it was like one of those miraculous things where I randomly got like a sum of money that I didn't expect. And I had off from work. I used to work in a high school. And the week that I had off, it was spring vacation. There was like a vortex healing week-long class being offered. I had the exact right amount of money. I was like, okay, I don't know what this is, but I'm doing it. And I got in there and I remember the teacher being like, good morning, wizards. Welcome. And I was like, wait, what? What did I sign up for? Like, I thought this was just going to be, at that point, I was a Reiki master. So I thought it was just like more energy healing. I didn't realize it was like, no, this is like the Merlin lineage. And so if you go that path, like, it's like interesting because that's when you literally learn energy healing with Merlin. So it's different than just connecting with him as a guide. Like that way you really can become a conduit for his special form of energy. And when you are in this lineage, I'm sure you can do this like other times, like we learn a way to like ask Merlin questions, like get yes or no answers. So now I ask Merlin pretty much everything. I asked him if I should have like 2 eggs or 3 eggs. I asked him if I should go to the store now or wait till later. I do all these things. And I think that because it's like that kind of understanding that he knows best, there's a wisdom there. And so I feel that there is an interesting dance here because we were talking before, like you said, like, these guides, they're stewarding you to be more in your power. And yet there is something that comes from like deep surrender and trust. So when you have a guide that you have that kind of surrender and that kind of trust with, that you can ask such simple questions of like, should I go to the store now or later? Like, should I have 2 or 3 eggs? What should I do? It's like one of those things that there is such a divine love. Like there is a trust that forms between you and that guide. And I share this because there is this kind of sense of really being held in like these kind of divine arms. And that's, I think, a way that a lot of people don't yet experience Merlin, because when you just kind of approach him like as the mystical mentor in the ether, it's almost like you're just going to him to bestow wisdom. And I feel that Merlin can become a very personal deity. Like he can become someone you connect with very personally, should you wish to really invite magic into your life. And one way I can kind of see this is to really see yourself right here, right now as a wizard. And I share this because that's all things when you work with Merlin, you are being initiated in the way of the wizard. And so you can go through your day, like people, like especially I think people listening to this, like many of you may be connected to like the priestess lineages. And like you go through your day kind of like really being in that priestess essence, like offering, offering things to the divine, like when you might have a challenging situation, really being that sacred presence, really bringing people into that divine presence. But when you work with Merlin, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit like, what if this day was perfectly magical? What if this day was magical beyond measure? And every little thing, even like making a cup of coffee, making a cup of tea, you get to sprinkle magic into this tea. You get to go on a magical walk. You get to see things through the eyes of the wizard. So that's really my first invitation to people. So what I wanted to express is that the way of Merlin, a lot of Merlin's wisdom is through living embodiment. So we can go to him to kind of like get this higher, like, magical wisdom, this more esoteric wisdom. And if you really like, come into that sacred Grail consciousness, great wisdom will be revealed to you. However, a lot of that is just wisdom that like it's on the inner planes. And really, like the thing about Arthur is that Merlin was his right hand guide. Merlin was with him in real time in life. And so we're really wanting to bring this magic of Merlin into our 3D incarnation, into our reality. And to do that, we are really invited to live as the wizard, to really see things through that different lens. If I was like, so you can show up in a situation that might be a little bit like more of like a confrontational one or not the best situation and say, I am bringing this magic, this wizard magic. I am bringing this into the conversation. I'm bringing this into the space. And so there's a knowledge that where you walk, where you go, you bring the magic that is not just Merlin's, because the magic doesn't belong to Merlin, but it is a magic that he knew how to wield. So it's this kind of invitation, Merlin, teach me to wield your magic. Show me how to wield this in life. And you'll see how that starts to transform your day-to-day experiences. Like I said, even making a cup of coffee. Like I will, put, when I have any kind of beverage, I usually like put energy into it. And I specifically intend magic into my cup of coffee, into my food. And I'm just wanting to share that that is really the shift in consciousness, is don't just be, don't just be the priestess, don't just be the bard, be the wizard. Because the wizard has a very different consciousness, a very different frequency. And once you open to that consciousness, you will see things start to move in interesting and mysterious ways.
I'm really excited to play with this more. And one of the things I'm so happy that you brought up, because this was so big for me when I learned about this, and I think this was through your course, Arthurian Magic, that Merlin was a title and that there were several Merlins. And I was like, whoa, I had no idea about that. I thought it was just Arthur's Merlin. And it reminds me of how Magdalene was a title, and people kind of think that Mary Magdalene was just the only one, but that was a title of authority. And so it's interesting, this sort of theme throughout these different initiatory lineages, that Merlin is just another theme. And I would also, we didn't talk about this, but I would love to just like sprinkle this in here. I think that the lineages of Magdalene and Yeshua and all of the lineage, especially around the mystery of Avalon, these are so interconnected, even from, you had spoken about the Holy Grail containing the blood of Christ, and Joseph of Arimathea came up to Avalon with the Grail. And some people consider that the Magdalene, some people consider that, the actual chalice, maybe both. And so all of these different lineages are kind of weaving in so beautifully together. And I consider Arthur and Guinevere, who we'll talk about shortly, to be just another embodiment of the Yeshua Magdalene Christ consciousness, like another set of avatars with the same frequency. Is there anything you'd like to share, or any thoughts you have around that?
I do feel that there is a great connection. It was funny because when I was talking before, I was like, wow, I feel this Christ energy wanting to come through so strongly. I do feel that there is like, when I tune into Arthur, I just really feel like there is that Christ heart. There is that Christ heart. And I think Guinevere is really a misunderstood figure. So like anyone who I know there are people here who have different levels of knowledge about Guinevere, but there is a wonderful writer. Her name is Wendy Berg. And she wrote these two books on Guinevere really as like this fairy queen. And this also kind of connects with Merlin because many people see that, like you brought up earlier, the world in King Arthur's time, that's around 500 AD. This is like really the split. This is the split between like the world of magic, the world of the Fay, the fairies. And it was like there was this realm that was so close to ours at one point. And really around this time, the two realms really moved apart. And I really feel that this was because like humanity had really shut the door on the old ways. Like it wasn't honoring the sacredness that was necessary for these two realms to be interconnected. And so there are people who will talk about this. Like there are different people who like their whole purpose being on this planet is mending what we call the fairy accord. So it's like really mending the split between like human beings, like this 3D realm, and the realms of fairy, the realms of fae. And so Guinevere, when you really, really look at the stories, there's a lot of evidence to support that she really is this fairy queen. And part of her initiation, like to become queen, to be with Arthur, really is not just like, when we talk about Arthur, he really is bringing everyone together. He is the one that's bringing all the disparate kingdoms, like, of England at that time. There were so many warring factions, and he's the one that is like, no, let us be one, let us be united, which is a very important message for these current times. But it wasn't just for humanity, because really Guinevere had really come to this earth incarnated, like she was this fairy queen incarnating in human form to really once more facilitate harmony, magic, love between our realm and the realm of fairy, the realm of the fae. And so to answer your question, when you say like you see them as like this new iteration, this new incarnation of Yeshua and Magdalene, I'm not sure if when I feel I do feel that Guinevere herself has like, she has a unique fairy soul. And like, but I think that there is a template there, this template of divine and perfect union that is held by Yeshua and Magdalene as well. And I do agree that I do feel like there is like a Christ iteration in Arthur himself. There is that energy contained therein. And a lot of people, when they hear the stories, they think of Guinevere as unfaithful to Arthur. They think of like the affair with Lancelot. These were actually stories that came into the legends much later. Really, originally, like I do see this as a divine union. This was a divine union that was intended to bring peace between the realms. Unfortunately, the peace did not hold. It didn't hold then, but I really feel similar to Yeshua and Magdalene, that it's like what they did at that time, we see it like, oh, that was a failure. They didn't succeed. Christ was crucified. Arthur was killed on the battlefield. But actually, part of what they lived and died for was this awakening that's happening on the planet right now. And there's a similarity between Christ and, and Arthur. Arthur is known as the once and future king. It is always that he will return, very similar to Christ. People are saying there is the second coming of Christ. And now I really see that, I don't know how you feel about this, really as this Christ consciousness. And I know completely that Arthur held and embodied that Christ consciousness, but I think he was too early. He was holding that, but it was too early. And another figure that's kind of coming up right now, my awareness, is like Joan of Arc. Same kind of thing, where it's like holding that holy divine consciousness, which again, I'm equating to that Grail consciousness, but it just wasn't the right time. Of course, anyone who's listening to this knows it's part of the God plan. So even though in 3D it looked like it wasn't the right time, what those beings did was plant the seeds for this later awakening that would happen now. And so really, I do feel that Arthur, I don't want to say he finished Christ's work, but I really do see, Christ as he's like the king of Judea. He was really this king. He was this prophesied king that was going to come forth. So it's interesting. I'm sorry if I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think part of that energy of the king is like, you are there in service to the people. You are there, like even though it looks like you're the one holding the power, you are wholly in service to that land, to those people. And so I really feel that Arthur facilitated great awakening for those people in the ancient world, 500 AD. And the legends have stayed with us. Like, I'm telling you, like, besides, I feel like Yeshua, like, there are no other stories that have been told the same way as the King Arthur legends. Like, people tell all different iterations. There's something about them that has captured the heart. And I feel there are so many sacred wisdom codes in these legends and these tales. And, one of them, like, besides magic, I was going to say that I really do feel that there is a special magic that is contained in these stories that, like, I feel like Merlin himself, the wizard that we spoke of, I feel like he infused, like, I feel like there was a special ritual that facilitated that these stories would always contain the magic, would always contain the sacred remembrance, and that they would awaken the people. And so this is very interesting. Sorry, I feel like I'm just talking right now, but I also do feel a connection, like when you described a similarity between Guinevere and Mary Magdalene, there is a certain sense of being, how do I say, vilified. There's a certain mistelling that occurred with Mary Magdalene for so many years, her being known as, like, the whore, the prostitute. And then it's like, oh, wait, she is the divine beloved, and same kind of thing with Guinevere, where suddenly it's like, she, like, again, like, the original stories paint her as a beloved wife, but then the stories change. And all of a sudden she is unfaithful. She is an adulteress. Like, all of these corrupted codes came into the legends, came into the tales. But I feel that there's a similarity here, because, like the stories of Yeshua, the stories of Jesus of Nazareth, the truth, like the true spark, could not be lost, regardless of how many mistellings, regardless of how many times they were spun. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the reason it's harder to access Merlin is because magic has been so misused. We must remember, this is hearkening back to what you said in the very beginning. We were talking about the bard, and I mentioned earlier the magic in words themselves. And so a lot of times that magic can be used for good. It can also be used for bad. So I really feel that the mistelling of the tales of Mary Magdalene, the mistelling of the tales of Guinevere, this is a form of dark magic. This really is using the magic of words to arrive at something that is not divine truth. And the thing, though, is that truth can never be lost, for it lives within all of us. And one of my deep connections, when I have worked very intimately, very closely with Merlin himself, he really is holding, it's like this crystalline, like, grail heart of divine truth. So really, like, divine truth, when you connect with Merlin, like, yes, we go to him for wisdom, but what the wisdom he brings forth really is this undeniable, bespoke, divine truth. And that's part, like, that's why it's almost like there's that purification that you go through to be able to access that heart of Merlin, that heart of the Grail, because it is so deeply connected to truth. And so there is something that we must do, really. There are the people who tell the stories, and there are the people who listen and receive them. And the people who listen and receive the stories are just as important as the storyteller. And they want to use their faculty, their crystalline hearts, to really discern what is divine truth. What is divine truth in these stories? Because I truly feel Merlin wove these stories. Like, he knew that they would be remembered. He knew that they would be told for centuries. And he made sure that seed of remembrance was placed in the stories, so that one day we would arrive once more at the truth. We would arrive once more at the magic that was there all along, regardless of how clouded it was, regardless of how hidden it was. And so, in conclusion, I do see a lot of parallels between Guinevere and Magdalene. And I do feel that at the end of the day, the word that's really coming through is like divine love. I feel like Yeshua, Magdalene, they had like a divine union like no other. It was such deep love. And I feel like Guinevere and Arthur, their love is often lost in the legends. And so for those of us who have those romantic hearts, I call it like a romantic, it's almost like a fairy heart. Um, you can remember this love between them. It is a very magical love.
Thank you for sharing that. And one of the things I want to speak to as well, to everyone listening and watching this, there are so many like nuanced details of the different stories and the different, components of the Arthurian mystery and legend. So just if anyone is like, wait, who was this person? Or how did these things interconnect? For me, I felt so strongly just this pull to all of this that is like very otherworldly. Before I knew any of the stories, before I knew, the different people in the stories, before I knew any of how any of these different things connected to each other, there was such a strong pull to this. And I think trusting that energy, trusting that those chords of connection to this part of history, and I feel part of my lineage, and it might be part of your lineage as well, watching this, part of your ancestry, perhaps, especially if you're from those lands of England, Scotland, maybe even perhaps Ireland, in that sphere where this would have been much more strongly in the land. You don't have to know all of, I think it's really interesting and fun and fascinating to know all the different stories connecting it, but we can also just tune into that energy of the magic itself. So let's bring in Morgan le Fay, because I was telling Elizabeth before we started recording this morning, she was like, don't forget about me. I'm here. Like, let's talk, like I'm important, not I'm important, but I need to be shared here as well. She's a pivotal part to this story and these legends. And so Morgan le Fay, I connect with as the high priestess, and also as, what we were just talking about, this sort of vilified feminine, which also, I think it's important to remember, like, during this time period, women were not like in our height of power. We were basically considered property to husbands or that sort of thing. It wasn't a time that we had our height of power. And so there's a lot of this vilification towards women in this time period. And Morgan le Fay often is seen as like the nemesis of Arthur, or in her sorcery. But really, she's the Queen of Avalon. So do you want to speak to Morgan le Fay at all?
I think one of the first tellings of like Morgan le Fay is Joffrey of Monmouth's. It's I believe it's like the Vita Merlini. I think that's where it comes through. So the Vita Merlini, I talk about this more in different courses. This is a beautiful story. There is a later Merlin, not King Arthur's Merlin. This about 50 years later. There is another Merlin in northern Scotland who has seen a great and terrible battle, and he goes mad. So the stories where there's but many people might be confused because there are stories that Merlin goes mad. This is not King Arthur's Merlin. I was like, I tell him it's not the same one. But so in this story, Merlin, this later Merlin is like, visited by his friend Taliesin, the master bard, whom I mentioned. And Taliesin is trying to remind him of who he is. And he does this by trying to bring back that energy of divine order. So he tells him, this, all of, about the seasons and the planets and the fish and the birds in the sky. And finally he says, do you remember? Like, this is a moment where Joffrey of Monmouth, the writer, really does conflate the Merlins. And he says, when we brought Arthur, we took that boat and we brought Arthur as he was dying. We brought him to Avalon. And there we were greeted by, it was like the nine sisters of Avalon, the greatest of which was Morgan le Fay. And so she is seen as the most skilled of her sisters. And she says, basically, give Arthur to me, give him to me. And, I will make sure that he is healed. And so that's kind of the last, that's the last we hear of Arthur. And that's why there is this conviction, this feeling that he is still there. One day he will return. That's why he's the once and future king. And so it's really, so again, there's a similarity to Christ in that it's like, he doesn't really die, because like he's brought to Avalon for a resurrection of sorts. He's been mortally wounded, and he's brought to Morgan le Fay. She is the one that will tend him. She is the one that will resurrect and bring him back. So there is like, so with Morgan le Fay, there is a lot of high alchemy that she is able to do. But I really feel this seems to be like what I'm seeing in my mind's eye, interestingly enough, is actually the Ankh symbol. And I really do feel that we brought Christ, into this space. I really feel that there is a great connection between Christ and the Egyptian mysteries of resurrection. So I do feel that part of what Morgan le Fay is tasked to do, she is like working like the highest level magic is resurrection magic. And so really when Arthur comes to her, she is the one who will really do the sacred rites of resurrection. Whether we see him again in the flesh or not, she really is the high priestess. She is the one who can fulfill these ancient rites. So even though she has these sisters with her, and they definitely are supportive, they definitely work their magic, she is the one that is known. And so I do think that there is this kind of is similar to, we were talking about Guinevere for a moment, and we mentioned a little bit about the king and queen energy. I think the high priestess is very similar to a queen in that there is one divine feminine that holds a higher power than the others. And it's not because they're not on a soul level all equal, but it's almost because there must be, it's like, I'm kind of seeing like in my mind's eye, I'm seeing like a diamond, and there is like the top of the diamond. There is that being that's really holding the frequency. They are the frequency keeper. They are the one holding the highest magic. And I really see that as Morgan le Fay, Queen of Avalon, holding really that frequency, that magic of Avalon. And Avalon, I also feel wanting to be present. We brought up Eden before. Sometimes people think of them as very similar because there is this sense of Avalon and Eden. They're both places of apples. They're places where it's like nothing ever fades. Everything is always flourishing and growing. But Avalon itself has its own unique, distinct energy. When you connect with the great beings of Avalon, there is a bliss, there is a beauty, there is something about that realm that is unlike any other place on heaven or earth. And I share this because Morgan le Fay, she is holding, it's not just that she is that high priestess, that she's holding that magic. It's Avalon itself is contained within her. And this is very similar because where Arthur really is, he is king of the land of Camelot. And there is something that I feel called to share. It's the divine right of kings. And this is essentially the understanding that the land chooses you. The land is the one that chooses who shall lead. And so it's not just for men. I feel that for Morgan le Fay, Avalon has chosen her to be its queen. So there is something very sacred here. In many ways, Arthur and Morgan le Fay, though they are later painted as adversaries, they are in fact more similar because they are the one holding the frequency of that land. They are the one holding, really holding that land as its divine sovereign leader.
I love that perspective so much. And that goes back to like a lot of these relationships between kings and queens and how I think today we have it pretty backwards. But
yes, no, I know. It's like the king or the queen is in service to the land, is in service of the people. There's like,
yes. And there's so many connections in the past when we look at the king was seen to be, first of all, in consort to the queen. King was also seen as being in devotion to the land and being responsible for stewarding the land. So however the land was doing would kind of be seen as like a judgment of that king, which I think is interesting if we apply that to today. But this is not only just like a Celtic way of life and belief system from around that time and before, but it also goes way further back into the Sumerian mysteries and really the root of the whole Hyros Gamos concept that I think a lot of people have misunderstood, and that's probably a topic for a different video. But the connection of these very, very these people who are responsible for holding large amounts of power with devotion and stewardship of the land. And I can't help but think too, as you're talking about both of them, they're said to be siblings, step siblings, and how, in royalty, how it's like passed down through the line. And if they're both siblings and they're both governing these different lands, that's just like a new thing that's popped in for me. Um, but I want to stop for a moment also and just talk before we go to Guinevere, unless there's anything else that wants to be shared about Morgan le Fay. I want to talk about fairies for a moment because I think some people watching this might be like, fairies? What do you mean? And I want to just speak to that. Um, I remember like 10 years ago, I had a reading with someone and she was like, I think that you're one of your very root lives or one of your most like you've had several lifetimes as this being and it's a fairy. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like what? And it's interesting when we think about everyone knows what fairies are. They're very common. I mean, literally fairy tales, like that's a thing children know about, right? And it's interesting how some of these concepts have been shown to us as if they weren't true. They're just kind of like made up imaginative things. And I was watching the movie Maleficent the other day, just like randomly, I felt drawn to watch it. I thought this movie was about something totally different. I was like, oh, she's in the land of the Fae. And it's interesting how, like, we can have this concept from programming for sure that these are just made up realms. But then watch movies like Maleficent, which, if you haven't seen it, Maleficent is basically Queen of the Fairies. And there's this kind of war between the realm of the fairies or the kingdom of the Fae and the kingdom of humans, and like a battle for, I don't know if I'm saying this particularly correctly, but it's just interesting how, so if backing up a second, if you're like fairies, what are you talking about? Maybe just start to consider all of the awareness that we have of fairies and how they are embedded into so much of the stories we've heard, even movies like Maleficent, and there's so many more, I'm sure. And where that stop comes when thinking like, oh no, but that's not real, because this is embedded into so much of the Arthurian legend. And I know you'll have something phenomenal to share about what I just said, Elizabeth.
Yes, no, I'm so happy you watched Maleficent, first of all. Because I think that's the whole thing is when you say like there are people who like they watch all the movies, like they believe in fairies when they're watching the movies, but then it's like, oh no, that's just make believe. Actually, I feel like I think that there is a spell. There is really like a spell that has made us stop believing in these like sacred, beautiful beings. I love that you've had like past life, like multiple past lives, like as this one fairy. And I think that a lot of people, it's like, we remember, I think we're more, if we first open that there is more than one life, if we open the fact that like, oh, I can incarnate throughout time and space, I could have been a high priestess in a previous life. Oh, I could have been like, it's like we start to open to that possibility. And I know then there are people who are more open to like, different communications from star beings. Why is it so hard to truly believe that the fairies are make believe? And it's interesting because there is a beautiful painter. I wish I could remember his name off the top of my head. But this guy has like I think he's connected to kind of like the Henson films. Like he literally just like paints all these fairies all day long. And he has no idea like why he paints them all day long. And it's like, where do they come from? It's like this realm itself is wanting to be expressed. And so I feel the way that I connect as a writer, as a storyteller, it's like the realms move through me. And so I know that whatever is coming through, like it comes from some place that is wanting to be remembered. It is divine in origin. And so I really feel that even like J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, it's like, I love that whole thing where it's like, clap your hands if you believe in fairies, that whole thing. Like, I love this because I know many of us are familiar with like the Disney version, but the original play by J.M. Barrie, there's a part where like Tinkerbell like drinks poison that's meant for Peter. And there is a moment where it's like, oh my God, what do we do? Like Tinkerbell has like fallen down and like Peter, like the actor, turns to the audience, because remember this was a play originally, and he turns to the London audience. Think about this audience, the most disbelieving, like this Victorian audience, and it's like, clap your hands if you believe in fairy. And it's like this amazing thing that in that moment I feel like J.M. Barrie opened a portal where people could believe. And that's the whole thing, is that I feel like all of us believe. all of us believe, all of us know. It's just that there is like a door in our consciousness that needs to open. And usually there's like a, it's like a tiny wee bit open. And when we fall under the spell of a master storyteller or a master film, or like maybe like a show on Netflix, all of a sudden that door to the other world, it opens wide. And that's part of the sacred magic of stories, is it opens us to that which we already know is true. And so going back to the fairies, like, I remember, I totally get what you're saying, because I remember when I first like heard like, wait, fairies are real? Like, that's not make believe. It was like, but it was interesting because once I accepted that, this is my invitation, this is the wisdom. Could you, once you accept that as true, if you accept that as true, how does that change everything that you know? Because I remember I had a hard time. Like, I knew I loved the Arthurian legends. When I started saying, oh, Guinevere is like an incarnate, like fairy queen, people were like, what? And I had to like basically really decide, like, steel myself in that knowledge. It's like, I know this to be true. We talked earlier about divine truth. And also I want to make sure that for anyone listening, like, my truth does not have to be your truth. I never want to say that something is an objective truth, because you are a sovereign, beautiful, divine being. And I want you to resonate with, what feels true to you. But I'm just saying for myself, when I fully opened to that consciousness of like, there was another world, that the fairies were right there in that other realm, that Guinevere herself was a fairy queen. It's almost like I suddenly realized that there was so much more magic in this world than I'd ever let myself dare to dream or dare to believe before. And it was so funny because I remember posting, I did this event a couple years ago, called Fairies and Fairy Tales. It was like one of my first big summits I did. And I remember like I had friends like who were like I had from grad school. And I was just like, that's it. The second I post this event, like, it's over. Like, they're never going to look at me the same way again. And like, I mean, I think that like I still have that. I have a lot of people that are just like, oh, it's so out there. And like, I know that I there are people that I lost because they weren't willing to open to the magic. They weren't fully ready. And I think that if you are here listening to this, there is a part of your soul that is ready, not just to believe, but to know how much exists in this mysterious beyond, how much is possible beyond that which we can conceive of in our human forms. And one thing that I also feel called to share for people who are just like kind of wanting that, not confirmation of fairies, because obviously, like, I can't confirm anything. I actually would invite, one thing I would love to do right now, it's kind of coming through. I would love to just actually take a moment and invite you to close your eyes. And I would like to invite a special fairy friend to come in to your space. If you are listening to this, open your heart, feel your heart like a beautiful flower, and feel the petals of the sacred divine flower opening one at a time. And I invite you in your heart to see a miniature holy grail. See this grail suddenly being filled with the most beautiful, divine, crystalline liquid. And see this liquid pouring over your heart. And now I invite a sacred divine activation from Merlin, from Guinevere, to really activate this fairy heart within you, this heart of magic within. And as this is happening, I would like to invite a fairy friend to come into this space, to connect with you. And this fairy friend, even if you don't immediately see them, I invite you to sense their presence. Maybe there's a little bit more energy of joy, or a little bit of the energy of mirth suddenly in the space. Maybe you hear laughter. But I invite you to just take a moment and see a beautiful being appear before you. Take a moment to notice anything they are wearing. Take a moment to notice their divine expression. Are they joyful? Maybe it's not just one, maybe there are many. And I invite you to see if there is something they would like to share with you. I'm seeing that for some of you, they are actually handing out a beautiful flower. I think that it's a rose. And this rose is an offering of friendship and love from the fairy realms. I invite you to really take this offering, to take this flower, to take this gift from the realm of fairy. And now really see if this being has something it would like to say to you. Ask this beautiful being how you can continue to connect with it in the days and weeks ahead, how you can bring in more joy, more fairy wisdom, and more fairy magic into your life. Beautiful. And we're just going to let our fairy friends kind of hang out with us for the rest of this conversation. And I know that was kind of impromptu, but I'm just really inviting you to experience fairy on a feeling sense. Like, this is a lot of times people want to connect with fairy through the mind. And that's not the way they like to connect. They want to connect really like they want you to step into your enchanted fairy heart. Your enchanted fairy heart, and receive the enchanted fairy wisdom that comes from being open to joy. Once you open to joy, once you open to magic, then you can really receive them in all of their grace, in all of their beauty, and all of their essence. So I invite you guys, like, I hope that was a little bit of an eye-opening experience for those of you who have not connected before with fairies. Even if you didn't sense anything, I invite you just to really stay open for the rest of this conversation. Maybe you'll notice like a sprinkling of joy, a sprinkling of magic. And I just get the sense that they are very happy that we have like actively called them in and connected with them. And think that there are more things I could say, but Allie, I want to turn it over to you for a second. How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you for offering that. And I think that that's been so much of my experience too. Like, mentally, we can't really get there because we're on a whole different level of understanding. So I'm so glad that you brought that in, because when we feel them, you can start to feel some of that frequency so much deeper. For me, it always just feels like they're like, just play a little bit more, like have more fun. And the other thing fairies always do with me too, and this took a few tries, like it kind of felt like, for me, my experience was that I had to hold the commitment of like, I want to see your realm. I want to, when I'm out in nature or something, like, if you're ready, I'd love to experience this field with you. And it took a few tries of saying that, and then I would start to see little glimmers. So like, I'll go on these walks and I'll just be thinking about something totally different. And I'll have the intuition of like, look over here in this bush. And I don't necessarily see something physical, but I'm like, oh, there's a fairy in here. Like, I can feel it. I can feel the presence in this space, but it's not necessarily for me something that I've physically seen, like what we might see Tinkerbell to look like or something. I will say in Akashic record readings with people, I do see that more tangibly. And ironically, the Queen of the Fairies comes through all the time in people's sessions. So you guys listening, I would love if you can put in the comments what your experience was of that. If you felt something tangible, what the messages were, what your experience was in that, short little journey with the fairies. I'd love to hear that. So this feels like the perfect segue into, we spoke a little bit about Guinevere as the Queen of the Fay. So I think one thing just to bring in before we go more deeply into Guinevere is the importance of marrying those two literal kingdoms together to create greater harmony. So if King Arthur was, working with us regular humans, super magical. We're super magical in our own right. But if King Arthur is bringing, this side of humanity, and then he's marrying this literally, but marrying the energy of the Fey realms, that would bring great harmony for all of these different dimensions. And I would venture to say even like the elemental realms, because there's a lot of other beings too that are in some of these other dimensions that are not just fairies. And really the realm of magic, bringing the two of them together. For me, it was interesting to understand some of the like background history around this, of this being the time when magic was starting to be more like criminalized, like people could be killed. And this is where a lot of, I think, the witch wound starts to come into play. When people would be caught using their magic, they could be killed for it. And this is where some of this time frame too for me feels there's like there's a bittersweetness to it, but also like a great love for it, because then when we look at the time frames after that, we can see what's happened to magic, and it's just like, this is so devastating. But before that, we can tune into more of that energy where the Fae and these other beings were visibly they were more visible to us as humans. So anyways, coming back to Guinevere, marrying both of those kingdoms together in an effort to create that great harmony for all, which didn't necessarily work out in that way long term, but we have an opportunity to do now as well. So what do you love about Guinevere? What would you like to share in response to that?
Well, it's interesting because I would also like to kind of comment on something you said. Like I have like there's an energy coming through here. And so I'm trying to like articulate this best I can. So in the stories, I agree that there is a marriage between the realms, but really the undoing of Arthur is Mordred. So Mordred is the one that like slays Arthur. There's stories that he's actually Arthur's son. Not every story holds that. The original stories, he is someone who actually, like, while Arthur is away, he actually takes over as like the leader and like takes Guinevere from him. So like, but it's interesting. I feel this presence because you were talking about like more of the witch wound, the witch hunt, and like this distrust connected to magic. And really what I was getting coming through, so I believe that it was really Arthur's death. It was like the death of Arthur, which really, for Merlin, I really feel the sorrow, like this deep sorrow, because this was all of his hopes. Like all of the hopes were really pinned on Arthur to unite the kingdoms, like to really bring peace throughout the land. So even though Arthur was someone who was, there's so many great battles, but I really see Arthur in his heart of hearts as an emissary for peace. And so it was really after this, like after, again, this where we keep coming back to these kind of Christ energies. It's almost, it does really feel like the scramble, because I know after the crucifixion, it's like Mary Magdalene, Mother Mary, they all were like, we got to get out of here. And so they left, like they left those places. They left Jerusalem. And so I feel like there's a similar thing when Arthur is slain, whether we believe that he goes, to Avalon and is, there's like that sacred resurrection magic with Morgan le Fay or not. I believe that it's after that is when the realms move fully apart, because they have failed. And I don't feel that, like, I don't think that they actually failed. There's always that divine plan, that divine mind. But that's when the realms move further away. And I think that what was so important was that this was like the last great age of magic. And it was important that we had the marriage of the realms. It was so great that people remembered it throughout time. That's like the imprint, that was the legacy that they brought to this earth. So even though it was destroyed, though it was lost, it didn't matter, because the legacy was greater than these earthly incarnations. Like the story, the legend was bigger than that. And so I do want to tie it into Guinevere, but I want to say that really was when there started to be more fear around magic and not really understanding magic, because at that time it was held in such high esteem. And so there was this great energy of the fall. There was like this energy of like Arthur fell, like we lost our connection to the realm of magic, and we stopped trusting it the same way. So like, this is a really important part of our history that like is not taught in school. You don't really get this, that this really was like when human consciousness changed. I'm just wanting to bring that in, like, so it is connected to the witch wound. It is connected, but it really is connected because of this fall. And I want to kind of go back to Guinevere. Guinevere had, to me, like, has, when you have like a fairy queen, she is sovereignty, she is power, she is light. And I think that it was very hard for her to be here in human form. I think a lot of us feel like that. When we have like these lifetimes where everything is just like instant manifestation and joy, we're like, what is this? And I think that was why it was hard for her to conceive like a child. And that's why there is no heir. But I do feel that for Guinevere, like what she really represents, like the interconnection between all dimensions, that we as human beings, like we can love each other, but that like really all of creation coexists on the most fundamental beloved level, that we are all woven together so gorgeously. And I think what Guinevere really represents for all of us, like, she's different. Like Morgan le Fay holds power in a different way. Morgan le Fay is queen of Avalon, but she really is that high priestess. Guinevere really is, I feel like, holding that fairy energy, that fairy magic. And she doesn't have to do, like, she doesn't have to go and like, you know, pillage and plunder different kingdoms. She doesn't have to establish dominion. Her magic is just holding that energy of fairy. She is like the portal between worlds. And those who want to be initiated into the ways of fairy, all they have to do is connect with her. And there are also different stories of different quests the knights go on, where they have to rescue Guinevere. And usually these stories, these are actually like, you know, very ornate magical rituals where there's a purification that happens. So by the time they go and rescue her, it's like their heart has been open to receive the mysteries of fairy. And so really, like, the same way we mentioned that there are mysteries to the Holy Grail, there are also great mysteries of fairy. Fairy is more than just fun. Fairy is more than just joy and magic. There is great mystery. There is great dimension and nuance, and there are different legends that exist in that place. She is the doorway. She is the doorway. She really holds the heart of that world within her. She is divinely chosen to be the one that comes forth. So she really is holding, it's like, I really see her heart as a portal to all of fairy. And like when she gives her love to Arthur, she's giving her love to humanity. So I really feel like that's part of her sacred incarnation. She is here to love him. She is here to bring that love to the land. And so I think it's so powerful, because we think of fairy as existing on these inner planes, that she would come in, and bring that fairy magic, that enchanted fairy heart, that she would bring that through. She really is an emissary of the greatest love, of the greatest magic of the fairy planes.
Beautiful. And that's such a different version than is really spoken about Guinevere publicly. You know,
Yes.
so many of these stories. But isn't that often the situation, that the external story like isn't quite it? And we find so much more of that magic when we go into the mystery of understanding that being or goddess or avatar, whoever it might be. We can understand it on such a different level to really find like the true gems within them.
Because I think what's coming through is often it's more magical than we can even believe. And that's why, like, it's almost like if we told the real story, Guinevere is a fairy bride, she's a fairy queen, people be like, what? Like, we like, it's interesting, because actually back in the day, they kind of knew that. They kind of knew that to be the case. Her name, Gwen really means, like, it means white. It was and it's like shining one. So it was very much understood, like, to the people in that time, that like she was connected to the fairy world. But it was like kind of a lost knowledge. It was a nuance in her name that many people haven't really paid attention to. And so I think it's really interesting. Like, again, we talked about the divine kernel of truth. It's there hidden in plain sight. And a lot of times, like, it's like these, I really feel like there was this protective spell that was placed on the legends, that if we really knew all the magic they contain, we could never tell them. And so that's the whole thing, is that this is really the time. This is the great remembrance to know the stories and all of their beauty and all of their truth. And yet, of course, there's still so much mystery in them. And that's part of that's what makes us keep coming back to them over and over and over again. Every time we figure out something else, every time there's a new piece of wisdom or revelation that comes through.
That feels, I don't know how long we've been talking, but that feels like a really beautiful space to close on around this whole topic. So you guys watching this, I invite you to feel more into these mysteries and where you feel most drawn, like perhaps which characters that we may have, or the different energies, beings that we have spoken about, you know, whether it's Merlin or Arthur, maybe not starting with Merlin as Elizabeth suggested, but Merlin, Arthur, Guinevere, Morgan le Fay, there's so many other beings too in these stories that you can tap into. And Elizabeth last year, this is one of, like I said, I was introduced to her through Merlin. And last year there was like perfect divine timing and synchronicity. I think I had watched I watched a video of yours with Marguerite Riglioso.
Oh,
And then you had launched your Arthurian magic program. So I've done this program. This is offered on her website, and I'll put all the links for all the stuff you can connect with Elizabeth on, if you would like to partake in that. And what I really loved about this was, so a year ago, like I had heard about King Arthur, and I had watched so many like TV shows and movies and things about this whole, like there's so many movies about King Arthur and Merlin. And so I was aware of all of these different mysteries, but I've been working with a lot of ancestral stuff. And so I felt really called to it in a whole new way, but it felt very overwhelming. I was like, I can't read these like Geoffrey of Monmouth books. They're too long. They're like old English. I can't. And so Elizabeth's course, she does a really great job of outlining so much of not just the history, but the detail of some of these different stories. If you're like me and you're like, this is a lot. And also, of course, weaving in the magic with that. And you were saying the last time we talked, Elizabeth, that you actually did your dissertation on with this book, right?
Oh no. I have written about it, but no, my dissertation, I'm a creative writing person. So my dissertation was like creative writing stuff. But no, but I studied this a lot. I can say I did study this a lot.
Yeah, because you were saying that you had read this like way back when, and people weren't really seeing it as like as equal of literature because it was from so far long ago. But anyway, she's done all of the studies and research on this, so you don't have to if you feel overwhelmed by it like I did. Do you want to share anything else in addition to that course that you have?
Oh yes, like let me share. But I do want to say, no, it's interesting because like you touched on something. I was reading all of these ancient books like Geoffrey of Monmouth. Like these are like the original, like the Welsh annals. These are the earliest pieces of writing that we have, like about the Arthurian legends, the first time they like historically appear. And I remember I was sharing this like when I was talking to different people I went to graduate school with. They're reading like all these Pulitzer Prize winning books, and I'm like, I'm reading about like these ancient texts, and they're like, they did not see the value. They didn't see like why these were so sacred, why this was so important. And I really feel like it's almost like you have to have eyes to see. So I feel that these texts, they are very hard to understand. It is hard sometimes to go deeper. But like the course I created, it's called Arthurian Myth and Magic. I do like break down a lot of these texts. I go into like what made like a specific work really significant, like why it was so important. And I will also kind of share like where the legends like went awry. So all of a sudden, like Guinevere has Lancelot, all of a sudden, like the characters are painted in different ways. And I don't just like break down like the legends, but I also like we do like a lot of like real Arthurian magic, like with the Holy Grail, with Guinevere, with believe there's one thing with Arthur. So there is, there's, of course, there's Merlin. And so this is a course that I created about like a year ago, maybe a little bit more. And if you want to, learn more, like I'm giving like Allie's audience a special discount. So usually it's $2.99, but anyone who signs up, it's like $99 for you guys, like through the special link that she's going to have for you. So that's like super exciting. If you want to go deeper, like it's basically everything that we've talked about today, but in more depth, in more nuance. And I also want to offer a couple free gifts for you. So the free gifts I have, like I've got 3 different like meditations. So one really is like, it's Magic with Merlin. So this is like an activation to really work with Merlin and the elements. And so I love this activation. It's really beautiful. You get to journey to Avalon. So that will be, included. Like I'm going to send Allie the link for that. And there are 2 other activations with Arthur and the energy of Eden. And also there is a journey to the Fisher King's castle, which I mentioned. That's like the Grail castle. I think that free gift is actually called Journey to the Grail castle. So there are like in total, there are 3 different like journeys that you can go on to connect more deeply. These are absolutely free. The links will be provided for you. If you want to go even deeper, you can check out Arthurian Myth and Magic at the special price.
Thank you so much for offering that too. That's a beautiful gift. So I hope that you guys take her up on that very special offer. And also stay tuned with Elizabeth because she offers awesome summits. She has amazing speakers come on with really, really interesting topics and subjects that if you're interested in this sort of thing, or if you have been a subscriber on my channel, you'll like the sort of things that she talks about because a lot of it is similar to what I share here. So you'll enjoy her stuff as well. So I'll make sure to tag her in the description here so that you guys can make sure to subscribe to her channel as well. Is there anything, Elizabeth, that you want to say before we close?
I did want to say that like I have some really beautiful things happening in 2024.
Yes.
I don't want to give like too many details, but I'm like planning actually to put together like some special stuff around the energy of the queen to like really help people in my community step into their power, like embodying that queen energy, working more with Guinevere and other queens too. So like it's like something that I don't want to like give too much information, but if you're wanting to go deeper into this energy of the queen, into this energy of royalty, stay tuned because I've got some really exciting things coming your way in 2024.
So exciting. I'm really excited myself to look at the queen stuff you're working on because I think that that energy is so important for us today and just interesting and fascinating. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being here. And if you guys enjoyed this conversation, please leave a comment. Let us know what your takeaways were or anything that you just enjoyed about it that you want to share. Make sure that you like the video and subscribe to myself and also Elizabeth. And thank you so much for watching.